selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector.
And joining me on the Beeline hotline, go to findyoursippingpoint.com to check out the bars in northern Kentucky, is Becky Paskin, co-founder of Our Whiskey. Becky, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, Fred. How are you?
Now, I'm fantastic. It's great to see. The last time we saw each other was at Tales of the Cocktail last year. We were hanging out in there was 1,000 people in the room, and we were both had a cocktail in hand, just kind of catching up. I miss those days. Oh
my goodness. It seems like another world, a lifetime ago, that we were actually able to hang out together in a group of more than 6 people at any one time and actually hug each other as well.
Yeah.
It seems like a sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you're talking about how the bars in London have curfews and you don't get to go out as much. I mean, do you miss that? We talk about the industry events. Everybody misses those, but I really miss just being able to go out with my friends at a bar and watch a game. I mean, what's something that you miss in this world of COVID?
I think it's just that. I think, having your friends around you, being able to go and sit at a bar and feel completely relaxed and okay. And I feel like the bar industry is actually doing a really great job, particularly, well, they are here in the UK at least anyway, of making everyone feel as comfortable as possible. The bars are extremely COVID secure, more so than any of the other shops or areas I go into. But we do have this 10 p.m. curfew at the moment, which is really hurting our hospitality industry. And there is a debate going through the House of Parliament at the moment, and hopefully that will be, the law will change. So we're trying to get rid of the curfew as it is. But yeah, it's difficult. I really miss things like whiskey shows and events like Tales of the Cocktail, because it's that socializing with other people in the drinks industry you just don't get anymore, apart from through a screen like this, which isn't quite the same thing.
Well, and let's face it too, we live in a very unique industry where there might be, I mean, there might be 20, maybe 40 professional whiskey writers in the world, and it's a very small community. And when we are all in a room together, it's just the best time because someone's always got, like a 40-year-old Lefroy or a really rare bottle of Stitzelweller. So it's always a really great time from a great drinking perspective.
Oh my God, definitely. I tell you what, I don't, have you ever been to the Isla Festival, Facial, Fred?
Now I get invited every year, and there's always, it's like always like right on my anniversary, so I can't ever make it.
You should definitely try it if you love that kind of thing, because everybody wanders around the island. So it's held on Islay, it's one of the Scottish islands, and every year through a week, it's just inundated with thousands of people, and everyone comes onto the island with something special in their back pocket just to share with friends. And
Oh,
there'll be like queues outside of distilleries, and bottles will be opened and drams shared, and it's just the most amazing time to talk about sharing whiskies and fun little bits and pieces with your mates. It's can't be beaten, really.
so Jacqueline, if you're watching this, and I know you watch all my shows, I love you. That's going to be our 15th wedding anniversary if we can make it happen. We got to go to Scotland and enjoy that. That's because this has actually come up every time, and we've always talked about going there. But when you have kids, it's just you can't travel like you used to, and of course now you sure in the heck can't travel. But like we've always talked about going to Isla together on our anniversary. So especially because she's a huge Lefroy fan. So and
Oh, you should definitely do it, and stay in one of the. My favorite place to stay on the island is Seaview Cottage at Ardbeg Distillery. So
mhm.
it's Nicky Heads, who was the previous distillery manager. He's just left actually, and just retired. Colin Gordon from Lagavulin has just taken over. But he used to live on the property. So the old distillery manager's house they've converted into this amazing cottage which just opens up on like it's at the distillery, like literally the guys are rolling casks past the front door. You
Oh
can wake
wow.
up in the morning hearing them walking past, and you open the back door onto this beautiful green space which is overlooking the rocks and the sea, and it's just the most amazing place to to have a whiskey or a morning coffee, whatever you fancy. But I would recommend there, Fred. That's
And
beautiful.
and in my book, Whiskey Women, I chronicled Bessie Williamson's life, and like I don't know, she's like always like hold like a special place, in that like she was so important, for Scotch, and I would like to kind of like I would like to track her journey a little bit. I'd like to go to like where she used to live, like find like her routines, and I know there's still a few people there who worked with her, and while I talked to him on the phone and everything, I think it just would be cool to kind of like track her, like some of the places that she went to, and she was an amazing, amazing human being.
Yeah, I think that sounds like another book on the cards, Fred.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing is like people don't realize this about us, but we're actually to our core, we love whiskey and we love the history of it, and Becky, you've just opened another book of whiskey history, in that you have been very, very vocal, in coming out against the misogynist nature of whiskey and sexism in whiskey. In fact, the New York Times just did a feature with you. Clay Risen wrote it about your criticism of Jim Murray, the critic, and basically how he writes his reviews. And there's more to it than that, obviously. But you're very, you in this moment you've always been a leader, but I think you have just propelled yourself to. You've always been one of the leading voices, but I think you are the leading voice right now in a very important conversation. And I just want to give you a moment to talk a little bit about, why you chose to come out now and talk about this, and where are we now and where are we going?
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, I suppose, as it says on the screen, I'm co-founder of Our Whiskey, which is a movement that I co-founded with Georgie Bell. She's was the global malts ambassador for Bacardi at the time. We co-founded Our Whiskey because we realized there was no real voice in the whiskey world talking about diversity and inclusion. We were basically just tired of always being asked if we even like drinking whiskey when we both have made careers out of this industry. Myself as an editor of a publication, and Georgie as a leading voice in the brand ambassador community as well. Both of us have qualifications in distillation, and we just felt that female voices, and also those of people of color and from other minority groups, were not being represented in whiskey marketing. And we wanted to ask the question, well, why? And who is representing these people? So we founded Our Whiskey, and the idea was to create a social media movement to showcase the modern face of whiskey drinkers, which included obviously women and guys of all kind of colours. And it got a huge reaction, a huge response when we first launched it. But over the last couple of years, it's not really picked up traction within the whiskey industry. And it's been frustrating because we've still been saying the same message, that women and people of colour are underrepresented in whiskey marketing. However, the industry has been trying to move towards better representation, better diversity and inclusion. And the Scotch Whisky Association had been working on a diversity and inclusivity charter long before anything to do with the Whiskey Bible came out. And so it shows the industry was really working towards this, but there was still not enough being done. And I think it was probably quite a culmination of things, of frustrations. And when I came across the remarks in the Whiskey Bible, I think it was just the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, really. I was just like, I'm done. This is just too much now. And I just put something out on social media, and Felipe Schreiber, who is a writer for Forbes, he was the one who mentioned it to me in the first place. He said, I want to write an article about this. Will you give me a comment? And I hadn't seen the latest version of the Whiskey Bible. I wanted to have a look at that first before passing any kind of comment. So I actually managed to find a copy and hit Control F for the most vulgar terms you can think of, and they were all there. Everything was there, and didn't make for pleasant reading. So that's how it all came about. I didn't expect. I mean, it's interesting you saying that I've become like a leader of this movement. That was never the intention, to catapult myself into this kind of realm, but I guess, I'm happy to be that figurehead and to lead some change, because it really seems like the whole industry, not just Scotch, but world whiskey, has sat up and listened to all of these voices. And it's bigger than the Whiskey Bible. I think that was the catalyst for this change. But the fact that so many women and men and people from all over the world really resonated with what I said, and basically vocalized how frustrated they have been with the treatment of their treatment within the whiskey industry, not by the whiskey industry. I have to add, it's not always by the whiskey industry. I think that cumulative vocal frustration by thousands of people at the same time has really hit a nerve with the whiskey industry, and I think that's what's brought about this change in this.
We met actually when I was in the middle of researching whiskey women in Ireland. I think it was 2011 or 2012. We met at Bushmills. I don't remember a lot about that trip because I don't. Do you remember much about it?
No, all I remember is going up to Elijah Wood, Frodo from Lord of the Rings. He was DJing on the decks. It's like, what the hell are you doing here being a DJ? It felt like some kind of weird dream.
So I took Frodo or Elijah out. It's hard not to call him Frodo, right? So I took him out to like a bar, and we stayed out all night. And the next day he looked at me. He's like, "I hate you," because we did what whiskey drinkers do. We drank whiskey, and anyway, we met there, and that was when I was in the middle of researching some women around Bushmills, and they didn't even really know the history of the women who were a part of their distillery in the 1800s. And I would find this out more and more as when I was digging into the history, is like brands never really put any attention into women. Like every story was about like a dead white man. But behind that, like actual owners of brands, from George Dickel to Bushmill to Johnny Walker to Jim Beam to Maker's Mark. I mean, all of these brands had women owners or people who were catalysts in the brand, and it was shocking to me because in 2011, 2012, I mean, we're not talking 1960. We're talking about like an era where women are rising up the ranks in corporate America, and you had an entire industry that is just completely ignoring, a large portion of it, not just in marketing, but in their own history. And, some of it has changed, but really it hasn't. It has not changed much.
No, it's funny actually, because I had as part of our whiskey, we did some research into the representation of women in some of the leading whiskey brands' marketing campaigns. And it's hard to judge all marketing campaigns. So we just took Instagram as an example, and took a widespread of the biggest selling whiskey brands around the world, and counted up of the posts that feature people, only 20% feature women. The rest are men. And in fact, on one brand's page, dogs outnumber women by 400%, which is remarkable considering, you really should be reflecting your consumer in your marketing. And I didn't know that I was a big fan of this particular whiskey. Now, funnily enough, one of the brand managers for that particular brand got in touch with me recently and said, I can't believe that statistic. That's insane. I can't believe any company would do that in their marketing. I was like, I'm really sorry. That's yours. That's your campaign.
Wow.
You aren't even aware that this is happening with your own brand. So I feel like for all the good intentions there are out there, and all the diversity and inclusion teams that all these companies have, there's still a lack of real understanding of the impact that representation has. As you say, not including women in the history books even, or even representing them now, it's having a massive effect. And the backlash to what happened with Jim Murray, this is the result of that ignorance. And I think, it's time that brands, not just brands, but everyone really starts to open their eyes and think about, okay, so is what I'm putting out into the world inclusive enough? Is it representative enough? What story am I saying? How can this be interpreted? Because it's not simple anymore, and I really think the world's had enough. Because whiskey's drunk. Like, I think it's 35% of whiskey drinkers are women. So
yeah, it's rising every year. Yeah,
where are they in the marketing? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'll say in my household, I'm pretty sure my wife has killed more bottles than me recently. So in our household, it's probably about 60% right now. responsibly. But one of the things that, listen, every time someone comes out with a speech, something that has a ripple in the market, there's always pushback. And I saw people like arguing for the sake of freedom of speech for Jim. I saw people talking about, well, why can't we market to men? And listen, you can market to men. Everybody has the right to free speech. But I just have to say, like, and there are times that, as a man, I'll be in an all men room, and I think how you purport yourself is a sign of character. And that's what I feel like. There's so many people who are not willing to admit that this isn't 1960. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with any of this, but I'm just,
Yeah, I mean, I see, I get what you're saying. I think there's a kind of lack of understanding of
yeah.
what the issue is here, because yes, freedom of speech, and we can talk about, this wasn't a call to make force Jim Murray to change what he's saying. It was the difference between telling somebody what to write and the entire industry supporting that language and that objectification, because it has, the difference. It's like, imagine instead of it being about whiskey, it was, imagine it not being a book about whiskey, it was a book about football. And instead of sexist remarks, there were racist remarks. And then imagine if the NFL, I'm going to use your American football. Imagine the NFL then supporting that book.
Mm-hmm.
That's the analogy that we need here, and it's not about like freedom of speech. Do what's right. And I think there was just a general lack of respect for women, and I think for too long, some people feel like they can behave in a certain way and they can get away with it because there have been all these excuses like, oh, well, it's just the boys. This is like locker room talk. And I mean, I know that's your president likes to talk about that. Let's not get too much into politics, but there's this kind of rhetoric of, oh, hey, we can say and do anything we please. It's fine. We're just joking. But it all has an effect. It all has an effect. And I just wish that, and myself included, and I'm not perfect. And, I always try to be the best person I possibly can be and try to understand. And even with the Black Lives Matter movement, there are elements of that I didn't understand. And instead of, I don't know, shouting out about it, actually go away and educate yourself. Okay, well, some people are upset about this. I don't understand, so I'm going to go away and learn about it so I can understand their perspective. And that's probably a better way of handling a situation than screaming and shouting and calling people names.
And I'll say, like, I think, when I was in college, I was a very different man. When I was in the Army, I was a very different man. And it was when I served in a military outfit that was, I think we had about 7 or 8 women soldiers, and that was the moment where I kind of grew into a man, and I changed, and I looked at women very differently, because I saw women doing the same job as men, and to be quite frank, they did it better. And I think one of the problems that men have is an inability to grow into understanding something that they don't understand. And so if you're a man and you're pushing back on this and you're saying like, well, what about this? We're taking everything away from men. We're blah, 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 blah. I mean, you're welcome to have that opinion, but I'd say sit down in a room with women that you look up to and talk to them, and you will find that I hope that your mind has changed. And if you don't have any women that you look up to and respect, then you're looking at one right here in Becky Paskin. So I guess I don't have anything else to say on that. But there is still we still have a long way to go, and you can't change a mind if it's like you can't make a horse drink water if it won't go to the trough. It's like kind of a old saying in the Old West, but there's just so much that could be prevented if people just considered others equals, I guess.
But I think the positive thing to take out of this is that the whiskey industry is now listening, and they have realized that there is a problem and it's widespread, and they are really the only ones who can do something about it. So in terms of leading them to the trough to have a drink, I think we're getting there. And I'm so optimistic that change is coming. I really am. I think for the next generation of people coming into the industry, they're going to have, it's going to be a different place for them. And I'm so happy and optimistic for them, because that was kind of one of the sad things, was during all this time I've had messages from a lot of young people, young women who have who are also sick of being treated in similar ways, lots of sexist remarks and sexual remarks and unwanted attention, and they were frustrated and actually on the verge of leaving the industry. And so many of them have said, you've actually given us a little bit of hope that things might change. So I would just plead the industry to listen to these women who are just coming into the industry now, and do something for their sake and for yours as well, because diversity is it's a power, quite frankly. If you have diverse teams, you're more creative, you're more productive, you can draw on different people's experiences and influences to make something even greater and better. So let's try and look after everybody in the industry. So yeah, I'm really optimistic that change is coming, basically.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thanks for allowing me to babble on there a little bit as I was trying to find my words. But we do have some other important issues to talk about, and that is the best scotches for a bourbon drinker. And so, like, the bourbon drinker is someone who they have a tendency to really like sweeter notes, and they like cask strength. So, I keep going back to my wife. I think my wife is like a quintessential, bourbon drinker, and her two favorite brands right now are Booker's and Old Forester 1920. You give her Basil Hayden, she's like, oh, it's watered down, I don't want it. So I think like you have a bourbon drinkers really, really like the sweetness and the kick, sometimes the spice. So I've got a couple in my head of what are the best for a bourbon drinker. What do you got?
So there's a few. I think, for the sweetness, especially if we're talking about corn, right? So in Scotland, obviously, blended whiskey is a combination of barley and grain whiskey, which can either be corn or wheat. And quite often that can be a nice sweet, but normally quite an easygoing style of whiskey. So for the bourbon drinker who's looking for something a bit more punchy, a normal blend, we're talking, the everyday names like Famous Grouse, Johnny Walker may not be your go-to. However, I would recommend a blended grain. Hedonism from Compass Box is insanely good. It's so layered and complex. It's got these beautiful kind of caramel, nutty kind of flavors. It's got all of that beautiful sugar sweetness that you get from the grain coming through, and lots of vanilla notes coming from the cask as well. So hedonism is one of my favorites. They do a few different individual expressions. Actually, just touching on what we were talking about, they released an expression called the Muse, I think it was a couple of years ago, in honor of all of the women that work within the company. So that was I think in honor of International Women's Day. But yeah, that would be my first hit, is go in with some hedonism.
Okay. So mine's gonna be Arbor Lore. I find like Arbor Lore's got like some really, so they have a lot. They come in at cask strength with some of their expressions, and there is just that really rich like body, like this gorgeous kind of like caramel, backdrop that to me like explodes for a bourbon drinker. Now I also like the fact that it noses a lot like a bourbon, and that it comes in with like just a touch of the oak and the vanilla, and it's not complex. I don't think bourbon drinkers necessarily like complex. I think they have a tendency, we have a tendency to say something is complex, but really they like upfront. They like wanting to taste it right away, wanting to smell it right away. And I just think a lot of the Arbor Lore products kind of come in and just and really, really deliver on some of the same like tasting profiles as good bourbon.
I mean, I'm kind of thinking if you're a bourbon drinker and you really love that sweetness and the punchiness and the upfront, then I guess a big sherry bomb would be amazing. And a lot of Aberlour is matured in sherry casks. I think for me in that range, I definitely would be moving towards something like a Buna, which is their cask.
That's it. Abuna. That's it.
A new release every year, Aberlour Buna. But that's a cask strength. It's a big hitter. Like I think some of them have come in at 60%. So yourself when you're having a drink. But Fred, I always, whenever I recommend to people like how to drink whiskey and they want to like slosh a ton of water in it, I always recommend they taste it first and then add water bit by bit to taste. Like,
Thank you.
What do you recommend?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hugely against adding water in like the analytical process. Like as a critic, I'm like taste it as it's bottled. If it is if you have to add water to it, to me, then you're like having to like, fix it to your liking. So if you're just drinking to enjoy, add water, add ice, whatever. But if you're trying to analyze it, don't add anything to it. That's my belief, simply because of the fact that it's how they bottled it, and if that's how they bottled it, that's them presenting their best foot forward with that particular product, and that's kind of how I look at that.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. I do, on occasion when I review a whiskey, there's maybe I come across the odd one where I think, well, that's a high strength and I'm not getting enough out of it in terms of the nose and the palate. So I'll taste it with some water. And if it does open up, if it is better with water, then I'll put that in my review, in my tasting notes. Like you need to add water to this to make the most of it. Because I think as a consumer, maybe you're tasting something, oh yeah, that's really great. And you don't, maybe you're still under the impression that the rules of whiskey mean that you shouldn't add water to whatever it is you're drinking. But I think it's, people like yourself and the other whiskey writers out there that need to get it across to everybody. Hey, it's your it's your drink.
Yeah.
Have it however you like. And if you want to add water, add a bit. But if you don't, then don't. But as you say, it's like it's down to your individual taste and how you want to drink it, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, it is down to your individual taste, but I'm merely kind of like saying like, don't add water or if you're critiquing it. I mean, that's my thought. And if you do add water as like kind of like a tiebreaker between two things, I think that's a pretty different like conversation. But like, one of the things that's probably not popular is like when I'm like at a baseball game or something like that, I'll have a whiskey and Coke. I'll have a whiskey on ice. I mean, it's okay. It's okay, and you don't always have to drink it like it's from the bottle. But if you are trying to, critique it, I think it is important to like have like equal playing fields to when you're critiquing things. So if you are adding water, you need to have like kind of like a separate kind of like tasting, like a tasting profile, and then combine them in your overall notes and score. And there's another brand I really like for whiskey, for bourbon drinkers, and that's the Glencairn 20-year-old. That one's also coming in a little higher proof, and it's aged in American oak. All of them are in American oak at some point, but this one I just feel like you can taste the cinnamon, you can taste the caramel. I love Glencairn. I think Glencairn is great, and it is one that really appeals to me for its like consistent grapefruit note that I like in it. But the 20-year-old, believe it or not, you can actually find it in a lot of places here, and that's the thing about like in Kentucky is like if you're a Scotch drinker, I would come to Kentucky because they get all the Scotches thinking they can convert bourbon drinkers, and no one's buying them. It's like they're sitting over there on the shelves, and Macallan moves, but Macallan moves everywhere, and it's just like you'll see all these incredible Scotches, and there'll be like freaking shelf of Glencairn, 20-year-old. So it's
that's crazy. It's just like
really crazy
that they can be listed in Edinburgh and try and convert the Scotch drinkers who were there for the Scotch.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
It is bizarre. Like the bourbon consumer, um, we have a term in this world called taters, where someone will buy an enormous amount of they'll buy an enormous they'll spend way too much on a bottle, and it'll be like 4 times the SRP, and they'll be like sitting right next to it something that's 3 times as good, but because it's Blanton's, because everybody wants it, they spend too much money on it. There's a whole psychology happening in bourbon that we just, I hope somebody who studies consumer behavior is looking at the bourbon consumer, because it's crazy.
What's it called? Taters?
Taters, like the potato.
Like the potato, like an Irish person would say potatoes.
Yeah. So there's a term we call them. They're called taters for spending too much money. Crazy.
Right, gotcha. Glenkinchie, yeah, it's that's a really good shout. I really like that suggestion. It's one of those distilleries that has like a really light, floral, fruity kind of distillery character. But when it's long aged in the right kind of cask, especially American oak, then it really develops that lovely sweetness over time and really comes into its own. So I think that's a really great shout.
Yeah. What do you got for? I think we're on your number 2 or 3.
Oh, do you know? I'm gonna copy your Abelauer and shout out another big sherry whiskey. So actually, the Abelauer Abuna is really affordable. I think it's one of the best value Scotch whiskies you can get. Another one is the Glendronach 15-year-old Revival, which is all matured in sherry casks. So if you want that really big hit of sweetness and indulgent kind of like chocolatey, figs, dried fruit, all of that kind of quality in a whiskey, or Glendronach is where you want to go. And the master blender there is Rachel Barry, and she's really made her name in the world of Scotch whiskey, particularly in sherry cask maturation. So her understanding of how to tease out the best elements of a sherry cask is just so evident in this one single malt. It's 15 years old and is really affordable. So I'm not sure how available it is in the States, but I would recommend seeking that out. It's not as strong, so it's not as high a proof as the Abelauer Abuna, but I think it might be 46. I'm saying that 46 ABV off the top of my head. What would that be in proof? That's not double. Anyway, I don't do math.
46 would be 92.
92.
Yeah.
Yeah, 92. So yes, that would be my my second. Actually, it reminds me of when I think it was for the launch, I was up at the distillery and Rachel Barry took us through a tasting of a bunch of different Glendronach whiskeys, as well as the sherries from the casks that they had been maturing in. Now, I don't think that kind of tasting is done enough, because I think generally as whiskey drinkers, our understanding of what's been in the cask before, and obviously with bourbon it's nothing, right? It's a brand new version cask. But with Scotch, like, it's usually gone into a cask that's had something before, and I think our understanding of the effect of that liquid on the cask itself is not as developed as maybe it could be, because we say sherry, but there are so many different types of sherry, Oloroso, PX, Fino. Usually it's Oloroso and PX, but the oak itself could come from America. It could be American oak, or when you say European oak, but it could be Spanish, or it could be Hungarian, it could be French. And I think our general understanding of what a sherry cask is and the effect it has on a whiskey could be so much more. So this tasting I had with Rachel was actually, considering the amount of time I've been writing about whiskey, was the first time I've ever had a side-by-side whiskey and sherry deconstruction. And this was only, maybe 2 years ago.
No.
So I would definitely recommend, if anyone is watching this, to go and find out a little bit more about sherry. So if you're interested in finding a Scotch whiskey, if you're a bourbon drinker and you want to find out more about Scotch, a big sherry bomb is probably a good fit for you. But do go and find out more about sherry and exactly what that is, and maybe that a local bar around you has some kind of tasting on.
Yeah, I love I love the amount of freedom the Scotch distillers have with casks. In bourbon it's a little tighter, and we're starting to see barrel finishes come into the category. And there's I don't the definition for bourbon doesn't really allow them to be called just bourbon anymore. They're bourbon finishes, and it's complicated. But
what are the rules around that? If you have a bourbon and you finish it, is it still a bourbon technically?
No. On the books, it is a distilled spirit specialty, and on the label, they call it a bourbon finished in whatever barrel. And it is. I'm a little concerned, that things are getting a little too loose in that, because what's happening is people are finishing in like multiple barrels, and every one of those barrels will be wet. So it's almost like dumping in a quart of port or a quart of cognac or something. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit deceiving right now. So it's of course, we've never known a whiskey distiller to deceive a consumer. That's never happened. So is there a lot of we're seeing a lot of the Japanese oak come in strides. Is there any like cool Japanese oak Mizunara cask coming out soon in Scotch?
To be honest, I don't see a lot of Mizunara specifically. There are pockets of it. I think Mizunara is obviously one type of oak, which is native to Japan, which obviously a lot of Japanese distillers use. But it's from my understanding, it's quite expensive, and not a lot of distillers are using that specifically. There's actually a lot of interest in different types of oak, especially local types of oak as well. So, what we've seen obviously with Westland looking at Gariana, but the one that's got the world going crazy at the moment is Chinkopin. I think I'm saying it right, Chinkopin.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Chinkopin finishes going around. I actually wrote a feature about this for Whiskey Magazine a few months back. So if you want to search for that online, it's out there somewhere. But there are a lot of distilleries really using oak near them. I think Balcones even have used live oak, which is a thing. There's also a post oak, by the way. And according to Bill Lumsden, post oak is called that because it's normally used for making posts, fence posts.
I mean,
so
it's a fine name.
Well, it explains itself.
Yeah.
There's swamp oak as well, which obviously grows in swamps. Glenmorangie did a series, I think it was in the mid-noughties, looking at the effect of different types of oak species on its liquid, and they went through quite a few of them. He really liked the Chinkopin, I think, and the general consensus is that it imparts this kind of like nice nuttiness and a nice vanilla spice to a whiskey in a way that American oak, as Quercus alba, necessarily wouldn't do just on its own. So, Chinkopin's the one to watch, I think. But Mizunara, is that popping up a lot in bourbon?
What's that?
Mizunara, is that popping up a lot in bourbon?
We've had a couple sightings. Angel's Envy did a finish with it, and you could really tell. I mean, but normally, that oak is used for like a couple years. They use it for a shorter amount of time. But like in American whiskey, everyone says things are Quercus alba, but really it ends up being like 6 different species to include swamp oak. It just Chinkopin's been thrown in there a time or two as well. And it's like, if we have such a diverse amount of oak out there, and it just Quercus alba is like is a nice broad stroke to paint, but when it comes down to it, we don't really know every time if it's Quercus alba. The foresters will say it is, and it checks at the box. And
well, they look, once they're cut down, they look very similar.
By the
You're
way,
right.
I just like dropped a bottle over here. It didn't
Did it
break
smell?
though. It didn't break. We're good. Did you hear it though? Did you hear it? You did hear it. All right. Okay. So, my number 3 is like we're talking about oak and everything, and that's what something that brings like Scotch and bourbon together. It's the roast, obviously whiskey's distilled grain aged in wood, and they tend to share the same barrels. A lot of Scotch is aged in former bourbon barrels. But the one thing that really separates Scotch, especially single malts, especially from Islay, to American whiskey, is the treatment of the barley and the fact that peat is used. And peat is starting to be used in American whiskey a lot. You got Kings County doing a peated bourbon. You've had some other people like New Riff do some peated whiskeys. Some have failed horribly. Some have done well. But to me, like, for the bourbon consumer who likes smoke, and there's a lot of people who like over oaked products because they like the charcoalness of the smoke in the whiskey. For that style of consumer, if you like smoke, if you like the taste of barbecue, to me, you cannot go wrong with Lefroy. Really, any expression, probably the easiest one to find is a 10-year-old. But there are also some consumers like my friend Carla Carlton who thinks that Lefroy tastes like Band-Aids. So just know that it's not going to be for everybody. But if you like, Rock Hill Farms, which has a nice smokiness to it, if you like some of the Arkansas releases out of Rocktown, which has a charcoal note, then you're probably going to like Lefroy, and you can find it.
Yeah, very, very, very popular one. I feel like we need to put a disclaimer in as well. I was thinking about this earlier about what we'd discuss, and whenever I go on a tour of Irish whiskey distilleries or even some American whiskey distilleries, I'm often told, hey, if you don't like Scotch, you might like our whiskey because we're not peated. And I feel like there's maybe a misconception out there that all Scotch whiskey is peated, but the reality is it's maybe only about 10% of Scotch whiskey actually contains any peated barley at all. So if you aren't a fan of smoked whiskey, then that's no problem. You can still find a Scotch that you'll enjoy. Just in the same way, if you're not a fan of the big bold bourbons, there are other easier drinking bourbons that you can find as well, right?
Yeah, and you're right. That is true. There's definitely a misconception out there, and I like to take people to Speyside, to lowlands. I think that there's a lot of finesse in those particular areas, and when it comes down to it, I always feel like the bourbon consumer, though, it has to have like a bold note in order for it to stand out to them. Now, fact is, there's just it's not necessarily a lateral turn for whiskey drinkers. I don't think that just because you're a bourbon drinker, you should feel like you're obligated to be a Scotch drinker. I see more people going to rum and to Armagnac than Scotch, but there are people who want to grow their palate, and they want to try new things. And so that's what we're all about here. That's what we're here. We're trying to help you on that journey. And what is your, so let's go to Speyside for a second. What is your favorite Speyside?
Oh, you can't ask me that.
Oh, that's right. Okay. What is your top 200 Speyside?
Okay, well, so I guess if we're talking about smoky whiskies that pack a punch, so that you talked about that TCP note that Carla doesn't like in the Lefroy. So that comes from that medicinal kind of character, comes from the style of peat that's used within the whichever whiskey it is. So a lot of the Islay whiskies have this coastal medicinal kind of vibe going on, whereas if they took peat from the mainland and from the central, then the flavors would be very different because peat is decaying plant matter. So depending on where it is within the country, it will have a different flavor profile depending on the plants that have decayed over time. So actually one of my favorite peated whiskies from Speyside is Ben Romack. Either the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old, both are brilliant. But if you want to talk about a peated Scotch whiskey that really packs a punch, that has like a really nice, big, bold flavor profile, Ben Romack really has that. And it comes across as a kind of a meaty smoke, a barbecue bacon kind of flavor. So if you like that charcoal, like ribs, that kind of boldness that comes from a bourbon, then I would recommend something like Ben Romack. Yeah, because obviously not all peated Scotch whiskey is necessarily all made on Islay. It can come from anywhere else in Scotland. I think there are several distilleries all over the place doing peated whiskey.
And we saw for a minute Ireland really getting into the the peated side. Or, remember the what was it the
Connemara?
Yeah, Connemara. But what was the big brand that was Michael Cooley? The Cooley. What was the name of that one? I can't remember.
From Cooley?
Yeah, it was a brand, and then Sidney Frank bought it out or sold it. I can't remember. It was named after like one of the revolutionaries of Ireland. I'm going to the Google.
Go on, find it.
Peated. I think it was. It was Michael Collins. Yeah, Michael Collins, the blended Irish whiskey. That was.
I think that may be a US exclusive. We certainly don't. I don't think we have that here.
Sidney Franks sold it, or basically Beam came in and bought the distillery and cornered out like anybody buying stocks from them, and there was like a lawsuit on it and everything. I forgot what happened. This is like what happened. This is like when like two like baseball or soccer writers get together and they start talking about players from 15 years ago. This is like what's happening right here now. It's like I'm talking to you and I'm like, what happened to that brand? What happened to that brand? And I'm like,
well, I'll tell you, I can tell you the Beam takeover of Cooley happened in 2012, which was around the same time that we first met at Bishmills Live.
There you go.
And there you go. Memory, because that was the time I just started at the Spirits Business magazine as their deputy editor, and covering the Cooley sale to Beam was probably the first major story that I worked on.
Wow! So we come full circle, of our conversation, and that brand is no longer out there, but they had a lot of peated whiskey, I guess, is where I was going with that.
Cool. I remember that one. I'm gonna make a note of that.
Well, you came into the business as I had about 6-7 years into it. And it's been a real pleasure watching you rise to the editor ranks and seeing your writing out there. And I meant what I said, Becky. You are a leader, and I don't mean of just the movement. You are a leader in this industry, and I'm really proud to call you a friend. And it's exciting to see where everything's going for you, because there's nothing but bright things ahead for you. I know that you're extremely talented. I love talking whiskey with you, and I just wish it was in person.
Oh, Fred, thank you. You're far too kind. But yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, as we were messaging each other, I think just a couple of weekends ago, when both of us would have been in Louisville for Bourbon and Beyond, and I still am yet to get over for it, but it will happen someday, because I'm so impressed with what you've managed to put together with that show. It's insane.
Thank you.
We're just doing a whole bunch of backslapping here, by the way.
What's that?
We're just doing a whole bunch of backslapping.
Yeah, it's all good. We need that from time to time, and it's my whole vision of whiskey is that whiskey is a really great conduit to bring people together, and it should not tear people apart. It should bring people together, and so does music, and that's kind of what all this is about, and that's what my show's about. I try to have something that's entertaining, and I've had a lot of great musicians on, and it's just with whiskey's meant to be enjoyed with friends and to bring people together and not disrupt. And I think you've helped, solidify that for a lot of people.
Oh, well, thank you. Hey, Fred, I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your favorite moment that whiskey has brought you closer with others?
It's going to be one that's probably going to be very sad to people, but Parker Beam was the master distiller for Heaven Hill. He invited me into his home in his final days of of fighting ALS, and I got to observe him during his day, and and I got to write about that, and it was a moment of I got the opportunity to bring Parker's story, to the world. Everyone knew about him from the distiller side, but I got to bring the person who's fighting to help people with ALS, and that brought me, he and I were friends, but I feel like that brought us close together. I became lifelong friends with his wife, and I also got to show the world, Parker, and I think that's probably the moment for me.
That's really touching.
How about you?
Do you know, it's hard to think of just one moment because there are so many times where I've maybe just been sat with someone who I don't know so well, but we've popped open a bottle of whiskey and stayed up until the wee hours just talking about anything and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And years later, I can still count that person as a really close friend. And I feel like there aren't very many other drinks out there that you can say has the same effect. There's
Right.
something so special and connecting about sharing a bottle of whiskey or a few drams of whiskey
Mm-hmm.
with other people. And whether it's, just staying up until the wee hours talking, or bringing out a hip flask at a festival or an event, or going to a gig and pulling something out of your bag, hey, look what I've got, just being at a music festival or something like that. It's something that it connects you with people. So I don't have one particular memory. I'm just so grateful for whiskey, for all the connections it's helped me make with people around the world, and the whiskey family, as we call it, because there you are in Kentucky and here I am in Brighton in England, and we're having this conversation. And even though COVID is keeping us all apart, it's still bringing us together in more ways than we ever dreamed of before.
That's absolutely true. And I think about the one person I've had the most whiskey with in my life is my wife, and I think about all the incredible moments that we have shared, from me sneaking in a bottle of Booker's after she had our first kid, to one of our anniversaries of toasting with a 2003 Pappy 23-year-old, and it just it is whiskey is love, for me. It is always going to be love, and look, I am a critic. I do criticize whiskey, but at the end of the day, I'm still on a journey to find the perfect one, and I think that's really what it's all about. So,
well said. Well said.
Well, my friend, I would toast you, but I don't have a glass here. I normally toast people. Do you have a glass by you? Here,
I have a glass of water.
I'll just grab a random bottle. Cheers.
Dude, it's 4:00 in the afternoon with me, so it's
it's 5:00 somewhere, so
true. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Fred.
Always a pleasure. And everybody go check out Our Whiskey. Then go to ourwhiskey.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ourwhiskey.com.
So at Our Whiskey on social media, make sure you follow us, whether on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Ourwhiskey.com is a holding page at the moment because I'm working on that right now. There are some really fun plans coming up for our whiskey. We've historically been a social media movement, but I'm transforming the brand into a commercial entity. I always try to live by the phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. So that's exactly what our whiskey is going to be doing. So if you want to stay up to date with any of the news and the progress, and we'd love it if you'd join us for the next phase as well, then follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter and you'll get updates for when we're ready to go live.
So go do it and go check out Becky on all social medias. You can just, you're Becky Paskin on pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So go find her on the socials, give her a follow, and make sure you support our whiskey. But that's going to do it for this episode. And Becky, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. And hey, everybody, that was my previously recorded episode with Becky Paskin. Now, Becky is an awesome individual, as you got to see, and she's also been in the news a lot lately, as we discussed, and I saw that was very lively in the chat, and that's okay. That's okay. You don't have to agree or whatever, but it's okay for everyone to have an opinion here, as long as we're all respectful to one another. And I think that's very important to remember. Just respect one another, and if we just have an equal respect, then a lot of the things that we consider to be hurtful wouldn't happen. So, hey, members, we're going to have a live stream right after this. Just give me a couple minutes. I will send a link out or jump on, and we'll do some live streaming. If you are not a member, what you can do is you can click that membership button. It's right next to the join, or it's the join button right next to the subscribe button. And you basically get into the community. You get all kinds of exclusive content. And there are some cool stuff. There's some cool things happening that the members know about, but the rest of the world doesn't know about. And they get to see the videos before anybody else. They get to vote on, like when I have a few celebrities to kind of choose from, they get to vote on that. And so it's a really great community, and we have a great time. And we're going to be doing a live stream over there. And yeah, I'm very excited to do that. I want to thank you all for coming. If this was your first time joining us, click the subscribe button. We do live streams every Wednesday at 6:30. We also have videos dropping throughout the week. And I'm excited to tell you, I'm going to be tasting some vintage spirits. On Friday, I don't have the link up yet, but I'm going to be tasting some really rare and exquisite vintage spirits. It is going to be fantastic. Cannot wait. Lots of good things. So I will see the members in the membership community here in a few. Be safe out there, everybody. Be kind to one another and be respectful. Also, vodka sucks, which wasn't very respectful. But, you know, there's a reason. There's a reason. I love people who make vodka. They're great people. And the people who drink vodka, great people. But the category and the people who sell it, that's where it gets dirty. That's where it gets dirty. All right, everybody. Talk to you later.